Well, the key result of the large FLEX randomized phase 3 trial at ASCO was meeting its primary endpoint of overall survival increase with Erbitux plus standard chemotherapy versus chemotherapy alone. This is an important scientific advance, and it's also important for patients with advanced lung cancer. The important thing about the FLEX study is that it's improved survival in a broad group of patients with advanced non-small cell lung cancer. Avastin improved survival also with standard chemotherapy, but in a smaller group of patients. So Erbitux represents an improvement for a larger group of patients, and therefore is important to the patients and to the doctors, of course. The median progression-free survival didn't differ, but we have to remember that progression-free survival is a soft endpoint and depends on the reading, the visualization of the CT scans, whereas overall survival is clearly the hardest endpoint we have, and that was improved with the addition of Erbitux to standard chemotherapy. The explanation why the PFS wasn't different probably is because it relies on CT scans being done at the same time, which it rarely is done, and also the reporting of the CT scans as to when progression actually occurred or not. And that can sometimes also be variable. Well, other targeted therapies with, for example, TKIs, oral TKIs, targeting also the epidermal growth factor receptor, were negative. And we still don't really understand why that was. They were large, well-conducted trials, and Erbitux, therefore, using a monoclonal approach to target the EGFR, represents a different way of attacking this growth signal in lung cancer. The FLEX trial used a standard backbone chemotherapy, namely vinorelbine cisplatin, but we know from a very large database that there's no significant survival difference for a wide variety of chemotherapy regimens using cisplatin and one of the newer generation drugs such as gemcitabine, taxanes, or vinorelbine. So I would expect the result in the FLEX trial with Erbitux to be generally useful for any type of chemotherapy backbone. Overall survival is the hardest endpoint to meet, and that was met in the FLEX trial. Another endpoint which is of use is quality of life endpoints. That data was collected, but we don't know the results yet. Other endpoints are much softer because they depend on CT scan readings and visualizations, namely response rates and progression-free survival. So they are softer endpoints. Given the broad group of patients treated in the FLEX trial, the addition of Erbitux to standard chemotherapy does represent a new advance, a landmark trial, and a new standard of care for that particular, but nevertheless quite broad group of patients. It's good news for patients because the FLEX trial has shown the first improvement in survival in the first-line setting of advanced disease with standard chemotherapy. So that's important. We know that patients value survival improvements more than anything else, and the fact that there were more people surviving at 1 year and 18 months with cetuximab is important to patients because they like to see their possibility of achieving a survival so that they can see an important endpoint in their lives, such as the birth of a grandchild, going on a favoured holiday, or seeing children married, and those things. So it is very important to our patients. The risk factors for lung cancer are primarily smoking. One of the concerns we have in the EU is increasing smoking in young children and teenagers, so that's an important issue. And then one of the major problems with lung cancer is that it tends to show itself only in advanced disease, so the disease is not amenable to surgery. Well, there are two main objectives. The first is to improve the people's survival and also to improve their quality of life. So it's good quality survival. Well, the current standard first-line treatment hasn't really changed over 10 years until quite recently. So the standard first-line treatment was platinum doublet chemotherapy. Now recently, Avastin with platinum doublet chemotherapy in a small group of patients has shown a survival advantage, and there are other cytotoxic drugs such as Alimta which might improve survival in a particular subgroup of patients with non-squamous carcinoma. For the first time though, we now have this new drug Erbitux, which given with standard chemotherapy in a broad group of patients improves survival.